For years, that's how long I'd been there before things fell apart. For years of being the person who showed up early enough to catch the janitor wheeling the mop bucket down the hallway, stayed late enough to hear the vending machine. In an empty break room. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even all that fulfilling most days, but it was steady. Back then, I thought steady was the same thing as safe. I told myself I was being professional, mature, the kind of person a company invests in. You know? The person who doesn't rock the boat, who takes on extra work without complaint, who says, sure, I can handle that even when the to-do list is already breathing down their neck, and I wore it like a badge of honor. Like somehow. Loyalty was its own form of payment. The mornings always started the same. I'd push open the heavy glass door, the metal handle cold against my palm. The air inside always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier toner. My desk, tucked in the far corner, never really changed. The same dent in the metal filing cabinet, the same slow computer that wheezed when you opened too many tabs. Time. I became a piece of the furniture too. I'd skip lunch more often than I care to admit, not because I loved the work so much, but because stepping away meant falling behind. There was this unspoken culture. If you were in your seat, you were committed. If you left on time, you were slacking. So I stayed. I stayed through headaches, through birthdays, through days when the sun outside looked way too inviting to ignore. There were little moments I thought meant something. The boss saying, "You're such a rock for this team." Or the time she asked me to keep an eye on things while she went on vacation. Those comments felt like tiny investments, like she was tucking away mental notes for the day she'd finally say, "We appreciate everything you've done. Here's the raise you deserve." Looking back now, that raise was a mirage. I didn't see it yet. I remember one particular winter. Snow piled against the windows, the parking lot. A sheet of ice. I was the only one who made it in that day. The office was so quiet I could hear the heater clicking on and off. I sat there, answering emails, feeling weirdly proud of my dedication. That night, I went home with frozen fingers and a sore back, thinking this is the kind of thing bosses remember, they don't. It's funny how hindsight strips the romance out of things you once clung to. Those early mornings, those skipped lunches, those extra hours, they weren't markers of dedication. They were just proof I was willing to give and give, without ever asking for more. At the time, though, I believed, this belief can keep you in place far longer than logic ever could. It's strange how doubt doesn't arrive. It's like a THUNDERCLAP. It's more like a slow leak, a faint hiss in the background you almost convince yourself you're imagining. For me, it started during one of our quarterly team update meetings, the kind where we'd all cram into the conference room, coffee in hand, listening to the boss talk about how tight things were and how every dollar counts. I sat there, nodding along, because that's what we all did. But then, maybe 2 weeks later, I overheard her laughing in the hallway with a vendor about finally getting that new espresso machine for the break room. It was odd. A week after that, the company threw a client appreciation dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Everyone wore suits and dresses. The table was lined with wine glasses that caught the light like little chandeliers, and the plates looked like they belonged in a magazine. I kept thinking about my last raise request, the one she'd brushed aside with, "It's just not in the budget right now." The moment, I swallowed it, smiled for the group photos. But driving home, the thought kept scratching at me. So there's money for champagne, but not for the people who actually keep this place running. That's when I started noticing other things. The way she'd leave the office in a brand new car, but still print out the cost-cutting memos. The sudden silence in the room whenever I walked in on certain conversations. Little glances exchanged. Between coworkers that I couldn't quite read. One afternoon, I stayed late, not unusual for me, and I heard her office door click shut down the hall. Through the glass, I caught a glimpse of her sitting with one of the higher-ups, papers spread out between them. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the tone. Something about it felt off. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was intuition. But once that first crack appeared, it was impossible not to notice how many there really were. I remember sitting at my desk that night, staring at the glow of my computer screen and thinking about a conversation from 2 years earlier. It was during the holiday season. I'd just finished covering for two people who were out sick, working 10-hour days to keep up. She'd stopped by my desk, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "We'll make it up to you." 2 years later, I was still waiting. By the time I finally worked up the nerve to ask again, I'd rehearsed the conversation so many times in my head that it felt like a script, you know? The confident professional version of me would walk in, make my case, and she'd nod, impressed. Maybe even a little guilty for not doing it sooner. Reality was not that. It was a Tuesday, late morning, the kind of day where the office lights felt too bright and the air conditioning hummed loud enough to make you a little dizzy. I stood outside her office for a few seconds longer than I should have, staring at the frosted glass. Trying to steady my breathing, I knocked. She smiled when I walked in that tight. Polite kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and gestured for me to sit. I launched into it, my hands resting on my knees to keep them from fidgeting. I talked about my years of service, the extra projects I'd taken on, the fact that my role had grown far beyond what was originally in my job description. She listened, or at least she looked like she was listening. But every now and then her gaze flicked to her phone on the desk. When I finished, there was a pause. It's just long enough for my heart to start thudding in my ears. Then she exhaled, like she'd been waiting for her turn to deliver a speech she'd given 100 times. "Listen, you're invaluable to this team. We really do appreciate everything you do here. But it's just not the right time. Budgets are tight, you know how it is." The words were smooth, practiced, almost rehearsed. I nodded slowly, feeling my jaw tighten. "Okay, but when will it be the right time?" I asked. That's when she gave me the kind of look you give a child who's asking why the sky is blue, patient, but faintly amused that I even thought there was a concrete answer. "I wish I could give you a date," she said, "but right now, we just need to hang in there together." Hang in there together. I left her office with a polite smile plastered on my face, but the second the door clicked shut behind me, the mask slipped. I felt like I'd just been patted on the head and told to be a team player while everyone else got fed. At my desk, I opened an email and stared at the blinking cursor for a good minute before I could remember what I'd sat down to do. My hands felt heavy on the keyboard. My mind kept replaying her tone, her phrasing, the way her eyes never really stayed on mine, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't believe her. Something shifted after that meeting. It wasn't an explosion, no dramatic walkout, no slamming of doors. It was quieter than that, more like a click, a mental switch flipping from wait it out to start looking for the exit. At first, I told myself I was just exploring, that I wasn't committed to leaving, I was simply curious. But that's how you justify it to yourself when loyalty has been drilled into your bones. One night after dinner, sat at my kitchen table with my old laptop, the one that whines every time you open Chrome, and dusted off my resume. The glow of the screen felt different in my apartment than it did at work. Warmer, freer. I scrolled through old job listings, tweaking bullet points, trying to remember how to talk about my work without underselling it. For years of being part of the team had blurred the edges of my own accomplishments. Every click felt like a small rebellion. Every draft of a cover letter was a whispered, "I'm not trapped." I kept it quiet. Closed my laptop the second I heard my phone buzz, in case anyone could somehow see what I was doing through the walls. At work, I was careful not to leave tabs open, not to linger too long on LinkedIn. Still, I had this nagging feeling. A friend from accounting, someone I'd known since my first week there, caught me in the break room one morning. She lowered her voice. "Word gets around, you know. Just be careful." I laughed it off, but my stomach nodded. I hadn't told her anything, which meant someone was watching closer than I thought. That night, I thought about our conversation as I sat on my couch, typing up another application. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, I felt the first flickers of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. I pictured a different office, a different desk, one where my work actually meant something more than a polite thanks in passing. And once I let myself picture it, it was hard to stop. It happened on a Thursday. I'd been at my desk all morning, half listening to the hum of printers and the occasional cough from the cubicle across the aisle. Just another routine day, or at least that's what I thought. Around 11 o'clock, I got the email. "Can you step into my office for a minute?" No smiley face, no thanks, just that one line. My stomach sank. The walk down the hall felt longer than usual. I could hear my own footsteps against the thin carpet, the faint creak of the floor under each step. Her office door was open just wide enough for me to see her sitting behind her desk, hands folded neatly on top, like she'd been waiting for me. "Close the door," she said. I did. The first words out of her mouth weren't hello or house. "Your morning." They were, "I've heard you've been looking for another job." I froze. My mind went blank for a second, just the faint roar of blood in my ears. She didn't wait for me to answer. "I want you to know that loyalty matters here. And when someone starts shopping themselves around, it tells me they're no longer committed to this team." I finally found my voice. Haven't I started? But she cut me off with a sharp little smile. "Don't bother denying it. I have my sources." That word sources sat heavy in the room. My mind started sifting through faces. Who had said something? Was it the friend in accounting? Someone who'd overheard a phone call? I replayed every moment from the past month, scanning for a slip. "I just want to understand," I said carefully. "After 4 years, why would looking at options be seen as disloyal?" "I've asked for a raise more than once." She leaned back in her chair, her expression calm in that way people get when they think they already have the upper hand. "We can't have someone here who's halfway out the door. It's disruptive to morale." I almost laughed at that. Morale. In a place where people whispered about the budget while watching her drive off in a new car? But I didn't laugh. I kept my mouth shut because I could feel where this was headed. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't about morale or loyalty. This was about control. The second I stopped playing the silent, grateful employee, I became a problem. I wish I could tell you there was a big argument. I stood up for myself in some epic, dramatic way. But the truth, it happened fast. After that Thursday meeting, I barely had time to process before Friday morning came. And with it, the email, "Please see me in my office immediately." This time, there was no open door waiting for me. It was closed, blinds half drawn, like she didn't want anyone seeing what was about to happen. I stepped inside. She didn't waste a second. "We've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately." Just like that. For years, condensed into a single sentence, my mouth went dry. "Effective immediately," I repeated, as if saying it out loud might slow it down. She nodded, sliding a cardboard box across her desk. "You can collect your things quietly today. Security will escort you out when you're ready." Double quotes, security. The word felt absurd. I was some kind of threat because I dared to send my resume out into the world. I took the box. My hands felt foreign around it, too heavy for something so light. The office outside her door looked the same, people typing, phones ringing, but suddenly I was moving through it like a ghost. At my desk, I started packing. The mug I'd brought in my first week chipped on the handle now, small plant. With one leaf turning yellow, photo of me and my friends from the company picnic. All of us smiling like we actually believed this place was family. I remembered my first day here. How I'd stood in the lobby, nervous but hopeful, straightening my shirt while the receptionist smiled and said, "Welcome aboard." Back then, I thought this was the start of something, that if I worked hard, kept my head down, and proved myself, it would mean something. Now, walking toward the elevator with my box, I realized it had meant something, just not to them. Security nodded, politely, but didn't say a word as they walked me out. The air outside hit me like a slap, warm, bright. Almost too much after the dimness of the office. For years, and it ended without so much as a handshake. The first few days after, everything felt muted. Not quiet muted. Like someone had taken the remote control to my life and turned the volume down I'd wake up at the usual time, out of habit, then just sit there, no rush to get dressed, no coffee brewing on autopilot while I grabbed my bag. Just me in my kitchen, staring at the clock, just wondering how something that had filled so much of my life could disappear overnight. Friends texted, some were sympathetic, some curious. A couple of coworkers sent the classic, "Just heard what happened, I'm so sorry." But none of them asked the question I was asking myself, what now? For the first few days, I told myself to just rest, catch up on sleep, let it sink in. But underneath that stillness, something else was starting to stir. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even shame anymore. It was anger. Not the loud throw-a-glass kind. The cold, quiet kind that sits low in your chest and waits. One night, I pulled my old work folder from the back of my closet. Inside were years of performance reviews, all glowing, emails from my boss thanking me for going above and beyond, project summaries with my name at the top, and then I found my contract. I read it line by line, highlighter in hand, marking things I'd never noticed before, clauses about good faith termination, sections about unused vacation payouts. I started wondering, had they followed their own rules? That question became a mission. Within a week, the kitchen table was covered in papers, printed emails, copies of schedules, even old calendar reminders that could prove I'd been in meetings or working late. I went through my phone too, pulling up text threads from times she'd ask me to stay late or take on extra work without extra pay. The more I dug, the more I found little cracks in their story, and each one made my hands shake a little less. By the end of that week, I wasn't just picking up the pieces, I was building a case. The thing about anger is, once it turns into action, it stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like control by the second week. I'd gone from sifting through old paperwork to sitting across from a lawyer in a small, windowless office that smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer ink. He was quiet while I talked. It didn't interrupt, didn't make those ham noises people make when they're only half listening. He just let me spill it all, the 4 years without a raise, the promises, the sudden firing, the sources. I finished. He leaned back and tapped his pen on the desk. "You might have a case," he said. "Strong one." Those words lit something in me I hadn't felt since before the trap was sprung. Possibility. Over the next few days, we built a timeline. Every raise request, every email promising next quarter, every glowing review that proved they saw my value, just not in my paycheck. And then the termination itself. No warning, no documented issues, nothing to justify it except the word of sources they refused to name. The lawyer explained the legal terms: wrongful termination, retaliation, breach of implied contract, words that sounded heavy but sharp, useful, and as we worked, more memories surfaced. Little moments I'd brushed aside before, now tinged with new meaning, like the time she'd joked about how hard it is to keep millennials from job hopping. During a staff lunch, everyone laughed, but I remember feeling a sting. Or the day she told me, "You're lucky to have stability in this economy," after I'd hinted at a raise. Back then, I swallowed those moments. Now, they were evidence. I started to see the pattern, how the company dressed up exploitation as team spirit, how they used loyalty as leverage, how they punished anyone who dared to think about leaving. We gathered everything: dates, signatures, corroborating statements from a couple of brave former coworkers. My lawyer even pulled up public financial records, showing the company's spending had actually increased during the years they claimed were too tight for raises. By the end of the month, I had a thick folder that felt heavier than its paper. Not just because of what it contained, but because it was proof I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the unfairness. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was holding them accountable. The legal process wasn't quick. It never is. But every email from my lawyer, every small step forward, felt like another brick laid in a road leading away from that office and toward something like justice. When the company finally responded, their tone was predictable: deny, deny, deny. They painted me as disgruntled, as if for years of loyalty could be rewritten in a few paragraphs of corporate spin. But paper doesn't lie. My lawyer sent them the folder of the emails, the contracts, the glowing reviews, the timelines. And once that was on the table, the calls started coming. Not to me, of course. To him, their first offer was insulting. A goodwill payment that wouldn't even cover a month's rent. We said no. The second offer was bigger, but still not enough. No admission of wrongdoing, just a let's put this behind us. We didn't bite. By the third round, I think they realized we weren't bluffing, that if this went to court, every one of those documents would be public record. Every email. Every "we'll make it up to you" suddenly up for a judge to read, and then came the call. The one where my lawyer's voice had a different weight to it. They're ready to settle, he said. For real this time. More than I'd expected. Enough to make me breathe differently. Enough to make them want me to sign an NDA so tight it practically choked the truth. I took it. Not because I wanted to protect them, but because I didn't need to spend another year in court reliving every slight. I didn't need the public fight. I already had what mattered, proof that I hadn't been powerless. When I signed the agreement, I didn't feel triumphant in the way I'd imagined. There was no dramatic music, no victory lap, just a deep, quiet exhale. The company got to keep their reputation, I got to keep my dignity, and a reminder that loyalty without respect is just self-sacrifice. It had been months since I'd set foot anywhere near that building, but one afternoon, on my way to meet a friend for lunch, I found myself walking down the same street. The sun was bright, the kind of warm, forgiving light that makes everything look softer. The glass doors of the office gleamed, just like they always had, the logo catching in the reflection of the sky. For a second, I slowed down. Not because I wanted to go in, that thought never even crossed my mind, but because I wanted to see what it felt like to stand there now. It felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. I watched a couple of employees walk out, badges around their necks, talking about weekend plans. I didn't recognize them. Maybe the turnover had been as bad as I'd guessed. Maybe my old desk had been passed down to someone else who was already learning the same lessons. A younger version of me might have wanted to warn them. To say, don't wait for years for someone to value you. But I knew now, some lessons you have to learn yourself. I kept walking. Past the building, past the coffee shop I used to stop at every morning, past the parking lot where I'd sat. In my car more times than I can count, giving myself pep talks before heading in. Life looks different now. My days start later, but they're mine. I work somewhere new, a place that actually matches pay to effort. A place where team isn't just a word they use when they need you to stay late. Sometimes, I think about that box I carried out on my last day. How heavy it felt then. Now, I realize it wasn't just full of my things. It was full of everything I thought I owed them, and carrying it out was the first step in letting it go. I didn't look back.